Imagine the very people who called you worthless, showing up at your door years later begging you for a place to stay. That was my reality. At 16, I was thrown out of my own home with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes and a heart that never stopped aching. I built my life brick by brick, alone, unwanted, and determined to prove them wrong. And just when I finally did, they came back. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, if the people who abandoned you came back begging for help, would you open the door or walk away? I want to know your honest answer. I still remember the way the rain fell that night, cold, sharp, relentless. It soaked through my hoodie as I stood on the front porch, clutching a black trash bag that held everything I owned. The streetlight flickered behind me, casting a lonely glow over the driveway where I had learned to ride a bike, where I'd scraped my knees and run laughing into my mother's arms. But that was a lifetime ago. Now those same arms were crossed tightly across her chest, her jaw clenched as if I were a stranger. "You've become nothing but a burden," my father spat, his voice cutting through the rain. "We've done everything for you, and this is how you repay us? Sitting around, wasting space, contributing nothing?" I was 16, I'd just failed 2 classes, skipped too many school days, and spent too much time sketching in my notebooks instead of listening in class. I knew I had disappointed them, but I never imagined disappointment would translate into exile. "I can do better," I stammered, rain and tears blurring together. "I'll get a job, I'll retake the classes, I'll save it," my mother snapped. "You've been saying that for months, we're done listening. Maybe if you're out there on your own you'll finally learn what responsibility looks like." I looked from one face to the other, my father's cold and unyielding, my mother's tired and bitter. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. "You're really kicking me out," I whispered. "I'm your child." "No," my father said flatly, "you're almost an adult, and it's time you learn to act like one. Don't come back until you have something to show for yourself." The door slammed before I could reply. I stood there for a long time, numb. The rain soaked through my shoes, my fingers ached from gripping the trash bag. I waited, foolishly, for the door to reopen, for anyone to call me back. But the house stayed dark and silent. That was the night I learned that family can love you until they don't. I walked away from that porch with nowhere to go, no money, no plan, and no one waiting on the other side of the street, just a trash bag of clothes and a heart that still hoped, stupidly, that one day they'd realize they'd made a mistake. I slept under a bus stop that night, and when the sun rose I promised myself something I didn't yet know how to deliver. One day I'd be someone they'd regret leaving behind. The morning after they threw me out was colder than the rain had been. I woke up stiff and aching on the hard bench of the bus stop, the thin plastic bag under my head doing little to cushion the sting of the concrete beneath me. A bus hissed to a halt a few feet away, its doors sliding open with a mechanical sigh, but I didn't move. I just sat there watching strangers board and vanish into a life that wasn't mine anymore. The truth hit me slowly, like frostbite spreading from the edges inward. I had nowhere to go, no friend's couch to crash on, no relative willing to take me in. My phone was dead, and even if it hadn't been, there was no one I could call. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. That first day was a blur of wandering. I dragged my trash bag through streets I'd only ever seen from the back seat of my father's car, every step feeling heavier than the last. I ducked into gas stations to warm up for a few minutes, pretending to browse snacks I couldn't afford. I lingered in the corner of a library until the librarian asked if I had a library card. I didn't. By evening, hunger had set in, sharp, hollow, and humiliating. I had skipped meals before when my parents were punishing me, but this was different. This wasn't a lesson, this was survival. At sunset, I found myself standing in front of a fast food place, staring through the glass as people unwrapped burgers and laughed over fries. My stomach clenched so hard it felt like it was devouring itself, and that's when I saw it, a help wanted sign taped to the door. I hesitated. 16, no experience, no references, no clean clothes, what chance did I have? But the alternative was another night on that bench, or worse. I walked in. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Carla with a faded name tag, eyed me up and down. "You here for the job?" "Yes," I lied confidently, though I wasn't confident at all. "I can do anything, I'll work hard." She sighed. "We're short on people for the late shift. You show up on time, do what I tell you, you'll start tomorrow." I don't remember much of the rest of that night except that I found an abandoned building with a dry corner and curled up there using my trash bag as a pillow. But I remember the feeling that hummed under the fear, the hunger, the exhaustion, something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. It was small, fragile, and still buried under layers of pain, but it was there. And when I reported for my first shift the next evening, mopping greasy floors and wiping down tables long after the customers left, that tiny spark grew. I was earning something, becoming something. And even though my paycheck barely bought a sandwich and a bus pass, it was more than I'd ever had before. The nights turned into weeks. The floor mops turned into fry baskets. The trash bag became a small backpack with clothes I bought secondhand. I was still sleeping in shelters sometimes, still hungry some days, but I was no longer that kid on the porch waiting to be let back in. I didn't know it then, but the foundation of the life I'd build, the one they'd one day beg to be part of, was being laid right there, one greasy shift at a time, and for the first time in my life I was proud of me. 3 years, that's how long it had been since the night I stood on that porch with a trash bag in my hand and tears on my face. 3 years since the words worthless had been spat at me by the people who were supposed to love me most. And in that time, everything had changed. It didn't happen overnight. At first, I was just the kid who scrubbed grease off tiles and wiped ketchup off tables until 2 in the morning. But I was reliable, I showed up early, I stayed late. And slowly, managers noticed. By the time I turned 19, Carla had promoted me to shift leader. That extra dollar an hour felt like a miracle. I rented a tiny room above a laundromat. Nothing more than a bed, a hot plate, and a single window overlooking the parking lot, but it was mine. I painted the walls with cheap second-hand paint and taped a photo of a beach I tore out of a magazine to the fridge. It was my dream, a reminder that there was more to life than just survival. But the turning point, the real shift, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it clearly because it was raining, one of those relentless spring storms that made the whole city smell like wet concrete and gasoline. I was mopping the floor when a man in a navy suit walked in, soaked from the knees down, scrolling through his phone. He ordered a coffee and sat in the corner tapping away at his laptop. I didn't pay him much attention at first, just another customer. But when I came by to wipe down the tables near him, he looked up and said, "You're the only one I've seen in here all week who seems like they care about what they're doing." I laughed awkwardly. "It's just a job." "No," he said, closing his laptop. "It's not just a job, it's how you do it. That's rare." We chatted for a few minutes about work, about ambition, about the kind of life I wanted. I told him the truth, that I didn't want to spend forever flipping burgers and sweeping floors. I wanted to build something of my own, maybe a business, maybe a home, maybe just a life that was mine and no one else's. He nodded thoughtfully, then he handed me a card. "Come see me tomorrow," he said. "I think I might have something for you." His name was Marcus Ellison, owner of a small but growing logistics company on the edge of town. When I showed up at his office the next day expecting nothing more than a polite rejection, he surprised me again. "I need someone in my warehouse," he said. "Entry-level, grunt work, nothing glamorous, but it's a start. And if you keep working the way you did at that restaurant, you won't stay at the bottom for long." I took the job. The hours were brutal, the work was harder than anything I'd ever done, but I threw myself into it with the same stubborn determination that had carried me through those long, hungry nights. And once again, people noticed. Within a year, I was promoted to team lead, then assistant supervisor. I learned about inventory systems, shipping logistics, client relations. Marcus became more than a boss, he became a mentor. He taught me how to think like an entrepreneur, how to see beyond the next paycheck. One night, as we were locking up the warehouse, he looked at me and said, "You know, you could run your own business one day. You've got the work ethic for it. And more importantly, you've got the grit." That word stuck with me. Grit, because that was all I'd had, grit and stubbornness. And now that grit was turning into opportunity. By 23, I had saved enough to enroll in night classes, business management, accounting, marketing. I studied on buses, on lunch breaks, on the floor of my apartment with a cup of instant noodles beside me. Every piece of knowledge felt like another brick in the foundation of the life I was building. And by 25, 10 years after being thrown out like trash, I stood in front of a building with my name on the lease. It was small, just a 2-room office and a warehouse bay, but it was the headquarters of my own logistics company. My first client, Marcus, I will never forget the day we signed that contract. He shook my hand with a proud smile and said, "You built this, all of it. And the best part, you're only getting started." He was right. That single meeting in a fast food joint had changed the entire trajectory of my life. And though I didn't know it then, the success that was only beginning would soon put me in a position I had dreamed of for years, a position where the tables would finally turn. The same people who had called me worthless would soon be knocking on my door, and this time I would decide whether to let them in. By the time I turned 26, the name on that tiny office door, my name, had started to mean something. What had begun as a one-person delivery service run out of a leased van was now a small but growing logistics company with 6 employees, a fleet of 3 trucks, and contracts that stretched beyond city limits. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The work was relentless. My days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. I was the one handling client calls, driving deliveries when drivers called out, repairing trucks when budgets were tight, and managing payroll from my kitchen table. But there was something profoundly satisfying about building something from scratch, especially when no one had ever believed I could. Every small win felt monumental. The first $10,000 month, the first warehouse expansion, the first time a competitor called me a problem. I framed the first major contract I ever signed, a 5-year deal with a regional manufacturer, and hung it behind my desk as a reminder I had built this with nothing but grit and spite, and yet success didn't make the loneliness disappear. At night, when the office was quiet and the city lights flickered outside my window, my mind often drifted back to the people who had called me worthless. I wondered if they ever thought of me. I wondered if they knew I wasn't sleeping under a bridge or begging for scraps like they had predicted. I wondered if they'd feel shame if they knew I was now signing checks bigger than their annual salaries, but even as those thoughts haunted me, I never reached out. I told myself I didn't care, that they were part of a different lifetime, a closed chapter. Still, life has a funny way of reopening books you thought were finished. It started small. A distant cousin I hadn't spoken to since childhood sent me a friend request on social media. Then another. Then an aunt. Then one day I got a message from a high school classmate. "Hey, did you know your parents are still in town?" I ran into them at the grocery store. They looked rough. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me felt nothing. Another part, a quieter, more complicated part, felt a strange knot in my chest. Rough. What did that mean? Were they struggling? Did they regret anything? I didn't reply. But that night I couldn't sleep. Over the next 2 years, everything snowballed. My company grew beyond anything I had imagined. We went from 6 employees to 60, we secured nationwide contracts. I was invited to speak at conferences, my face appeared on a local business magazine under the headline, "From Homeless Teen to Logistics Queen." I remember staring at that cover for a long time. Me, the kid who'd once begged to sleep on a friend's couch, now photographed in a sleek suit smiling beside a company worth 7 figures, and that's when the past finally came knocking. It was a Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from a long day of meetings and was sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by takeout containers and spreadsheets when my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Is this my name? It's your mother, we need to talk." For a moment, I thought it was a joke. My mother hadn't spoken to me in over a decade. The last thing she'd ever said to me was that I'd never be anything. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, and then another message came through. "We're having a hard time, please call me." I didn't. I set the phone down and went back to work, but my hands were shaking and the words kept echoing in my mind. "We're having a hard time." That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories crashing over me. The screaming, the slammed doors, the humiliation of being thrown out like garbage. And now, all these years later, they wanted my help? I didn't respond, not then, not the next day, not the week after that. But as the messages trickled in, first from my mother, then my father, then a cousin acting as a go-between, one thing became clear: they knew exactly who I was now. They'd seen the business, they'd read the articles, they knew I was no longer the broken teenager they'd abandoned, and they wanted a piece of the life I had built without them. At first I told myself I'd never give them the satisfaction of a reply, but life doesn't always listen to the promises we make to ourselves. Because just a few months later, on a cold November morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I froze. There they were, older, thinner, grayer, but unmistakably them. My mother's eyes were red, my father's hands trembling, and between them on the porch sat 2 suitcases. We need somewhere to stay, my mother whispered, please. The people who once swore I'd never be anything were now standing on my doorstep, asking for a room in the house I had bought without them. And for the first time in 14 years, I had the power. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway, staring at the people who had once made me believe I was worth less than the dirt on their shoes. My mother looked nothing like the woman I remembered. Her once perfectly styled hair was streaked with gray and pulled into a messy bun. Deep lines carved into her face told stories of years I hadn't witnessed, stories I wasn't sure I cared to know. My father's hands, the same ones that had slammed the front door in my face 14 years ago, were trembling against the handle of an old suitcase. He wouldn't meet my eyes, please, my mother whispered again, her voice cracking. We have nowhere else to go. It was surreal, almost like watching a movie of someone else's life. These were the same people who told me I'd never be anything, who called me a burden, who tossed me out with a garbage bag and a bruised heart. And now they were standing on my porch, begging for my help. I didn't say a word, I didn't know how to. My mouth had gone dry, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut just like they had, to give them the same cold dismissal they'd given me. To say no, not now, not ever. But another part, the small, infuriating, still wounded part, just stood there watching them shiver in the November air. How did you even find me? I asked finally, my voice sharper than I intended. My father swallowed hard. We saw the article, the business one. We've been following your company for a while now. We're proud of you. I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. Proud? You called me worthless, you threw me out like trash, and now you're proud? My mother's eyes filled with tears. We were wrong, we were angry and stubborn, and you were cruel, I interrupted. You broke me. And when I needed you most, you weren't there. Silence, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves around their suitcases. My father shifted awkwardly, his shoulders sagging with what looked like shame, though I didn't trust myself to believe it. I know we don't deserve forgiveness, my mother said quietly, but we're not asking for that, just a place to stay, for a little while. I stared at the suitcases, at their tired faces, at the ghosts of my past, now standing helpless and human before me. I wanted to feel triumphant, victorious even, but instead I just felt hollow. Why now? I asked. Why after all these years? We lost the house, my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. We lost everything. Your brother moved away, and your sister, she doesn't speak to us anymore. We have nowhere else. The words hit me harder than I expected. Your brother, your sister, the real children, the ones who had always been worth keeping. I hadn't spoken to either of them since I left, and apparently neither had they. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. And you think you can just show up here after everything you did, and I'll open my home to you? No, my mother said softly. We hoped, that's all. We hoped you might have more compassion in your heart than we had. That stung. Not because it was manipulative, it was, but because it was partially true. Despite everything, compassion had always been my weakness. Even after they'd broken me, I still wondered if they were okay. Even now, staring at them on my porch, a part of me wanted to ease their suffering, but compassion didn't erase the scars. I took a deep breath and stepped back slightly. I haven't decided yet, I said coldly. But if I do let you in, it will be on my terms. You don't get to waltz back into my life and pretend the past didn't happen. You don't get to erase the damage you caused. We understand, my father murmured. Do you? I asked, my voice shaking now. Do you really? Because you can't possibly understand what it's like to be 17 and terrified and completely alone. You can't know what it's like to cry yourself to sleep in a shelter wondering why the people who were supposed to love you decided you weren't worth loving. Tears were streaming down my mother's face now. We were wrong, she whispered. Every day since I've wished I could take it back. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The last 14 years stretched between us like a canyon, too wide to cross, too deep to fill. And yet for the first time I saw them not as the monsters of my childhood but as flawed, broken people who had finally been humbled by life. I didn't forgive them, not yet, maybe not ever, but I did something that surprised even me. I opened the door wider. You can come in, I said quietly. For tonight. Their relief was immediate, visible in the way my mother's shoulders collapsed, in the way my father's eyes softened. They picked up their suitcases and stepped into my house, into my world. and as the door clicked shut behind them, I exhaled slowly, the weight of 14 years pressing against my chest. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just the first step. The apartment was too quiet once they settled in, the kind of silence that presses down on you and refuses to leave. My mother flopped onto the couch like she owned the place, the same couch I had bought with my first big paycheck, and my father sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paperwork I'd left there. Neither spoke, except for occasional murmurs to each other in low, hushed tones. I didn't know what to do with myself. I paced, I cleaned, I pretended to organize things I didn't need organizing, all while feeling their eyes on me, heavy and expectant. It was surreal, like hosting ghosts in my own home, ghosts of a childhood that had left me aching for something they'd never given. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "You've done well," she said, her voice hesitant. "We didn't realize what you've accomplished." I stopped mid-step, my back to her. "Of course you didn't," I said softly. "You weren't there to see it. You didn't care." Her lips trembled. I, I know I was wrong, I know I hurt you, but seeing you now, I realize I've missed so much, we've missed so much." I let out a bitter laugh. "Missed, you mean abandoned. Let me get this straight, you abandoned me, and now you want me to, what? Take care of you, comfort you, make you feel better about yourself?" My father finally spoke. His voice was quieter, almost fragile. "We didn't know how to deal with you. We didn't know how to parent someone like you." "Someone like me," I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean someone who didn't fit into your perfect little mold, someone who didn't obey every command, every expectation, someone you decided wasn't worth the effort." They looked at me, shame flickering across their faces, but it didn't erase the past. It couldn't, and it shouldn't. I could still feel the echo of every slammed door, every cruel word, every night I cried alone. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. "Do you have any idea what it was like?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To survive without a home, without money, without anyone telling you it would be okay?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I can't imagine," she whispered. "I can't, I know I can't make up for it, but I want to try, please." I didn't answer. I turned and walked to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I needed space, I needed to breathe, I needed to remind myself that I was the one in control now. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound from the living room, the shuffle of their movements, the quiet sighs, the clink of a cup made my chest tighten. I thought about the girl I once was, the scared 16-year-old thrown into the world without warning, and the woman I had become, strong, independent, unbroken. I realized something. Compassion didn't mean weakness. Letting them in didn't mean forgiveness. I could show mercy without giving them power over me. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I had made a decision. I would allow them to stay, but with rules, with boundaries, with the understanding that this was my home, my life, and they were only welcome because I chose it. And for the first time in 14 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of calm. I was finally in control of my story. The apartment was too quiet once they settled in, the kind of silence that presses down on you and refuses to leave. My mother flopped onto the couch like she owned the place, the same couch I had bought with my first big paycheck, and my father sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paperwork I'd left there. Neither spoke, except for occasional murmurs to each other in low, hushed tones. I didn't know what to do with myself. I paced, I cleaned, I pretended to organize things I didn't need organizing, all while feeling their eyes on me, heavy and expectant. It was surreal, like hosting ghosts in my own home, ghosts of a childhood that had left me aching for something they'd never given. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "You've done well," she said, her voice hesitant. "We didn't realize what you've accomplished." I stopped mid-step, my back to her. "Of course you didn't," I said softly. "You weren't there to see it. You didn't care." Her lips trembled. I, I know I was wrong, I know I hurt you, but seeing you now, I realize I've missed so much, we've missed so much." I let out a bitter laugh. "Missed, you mean abandoned. Let me get this straight, you abandoned me, and now you want me to, what? Take care of you, comfort you, make you feel better about yourself?" My father finally spoke. His voice was quieter, almost fragile. "We didn't know how to deal with you. We didn't know how to parent someone like you." "Someone like me," I repeated, my voice rising. You mean someone who didn't fit into your perfect little mold, someone who didn't obey every command, every expectation, someone you decided wasn't worth the effort. They looked at me, shame flickering across their faces, but it didn't erase the past. It couldn't, and it shouldn't. I could still feel the echo of every slammed door, every cruel word, every night I cried alone. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Do you have any idea what it was like? I asked, my voice trembling. To survive without a home, without money, without anyone telling you it would be okay? My mother's eyes filled with tears. I can't imagine, she whispered. I can't, I know I can't make up for it, but I want to try, please. I didn't answer. I turned and walked to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I needed space, I needed to breathe, I needed to remind myself that I was the one in control now. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound from the living room, the shuffle of their movements, the quiet sighs, the clink of a cup made my chest tighten. I thought about the girl I once was, the scared 16-year-old thrown into the world without warning, and the woman I had become, strong, independent, unbroken. I realized something. Compassion didn't mean weakness. Letting them in didn't mean forgiveness. I could show mercy without giving them power over me. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I had made a decision. I would allow them to stay, but with rules, with boundaries, with the understanding that this was my home, my life, and they were only welcome because I chose it. And for the first time in 14 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of calm. I was finally in control of my story. The days blurred together, filled with an uneasy rhythm. They were here, but it didn't feel like family. It felt like living with strangers who carried the weight of my past, like shadows haunting every corner of my home. I found myself walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every glance, every movement. My mother tried to talk, asking questions about my business, my life, my friends, but every inquiry felt like a test, a reminder that the people who were supposed to nurture me had once abandoned me. One evening, as rain pelted the windows and the city outside drowned in gray, I found a photo on the coffee table. It was from my teenage years, my mother holding me before the night she threw me out. I froze. The look in her eyes wasn't anger or cruelty in that picture, it was love, something I hadn't seen since I was a child. I picked up the photo, my hands trembling. You kept this? I asked softly, not looking at her. She nodded. I never wanted to let go, even when I pushed you away, even when I said terrible things. I loved you, I still do. I turned to her, anger and pain clashing with something else, something I hadn't felt in years, confusion, sadness, and a small stubborn flicker of compassion. I don't know if that's enough, I said quietly. You hurt me in ways you can't imagine, and you can't just show up and expect me to forget 14 years of being abandoned, 14 years of wondering why my own mother didn't want me. Tears ran down her face. I know, and I don't ask for your forgiveness, I want to be part of your life now, even a little. I swallowed hard, the knot in my chest tightening. I wanted to scream, to slam doors, to make them feel even a fraction of what I had felt, but I didn't. Instead, I put the photo down and walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked street. The past was still alive, lurking in every corner, in every memory. But for the first time, I realized something important. I was no longer a victim. I had the power to decide how much of them I let in. And that night, as the rain washed the city clean, I made a silent vow: I would protect myself. I would protect the life I had built, and I would decide on my own terms how much of my past to allow into the present. The first week under the same roof had been relatively quiet, almost eerily so, but by the second week the fragile peace began to crack. My parents weren't malicious, not exactly, but old habits die hard, and the habits that had hurt me for years were resurfacing in small, irritating ways. My mother rearranged my living room yet again, moving my books and decorations without asking. She muttered about improving the flow, but I knew it was about control, the same control she'd tried to exert over my life when I was a teenager. Mom, I said, my patience thinning, I've asked you before, do not move my things, this is my space, you are a guest here, not the landlord. She flinched. I was just trying to help. I don't need help, I need respect, I shot back. Later that day, my father called me into the kitchen. I thought we agreed to pitch in, he said, holding a stack of unpaid bills. We can help around here take care of some of the responsibilities. I stopped him before he could continue. No, you're here temporarily, you don't get to act like you're running my house, you want a place to stay, fine. But my rules, my boundaries, if you can't respect that, you leave. They nodded solemnly, but I could see the tension in their faces. My mother's jaw was tight, my father's shoulders stiff. The air was thick with unspoken resentment, mine and theirs. The boundaries I set were not just about physical space, they were about emotional space. I wouldn't let them manipulate me, guilt me, or rewrite history, and yet every small interaction felt like a battle. One evening, my mother wandered into my office while I was working, peering at my laptop screen. "You're still working too hard," she said. "You should take a break, relax, eat something." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Do not tell me how to live my life," I snapped, closing the laptop with deliberate force. "I built this, I run this, and no one, not even you, gets to interfere." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. My parents exchanged glances, the kind that said, "We're in this together, but we're on the defense." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I had expected resentment, anger, and mistrust, but not the exhaustion that came from constantly guarding my emotions, constantly policing my home for emotional intrusions. Compassion had limits, I realized, and I was testing mine every single day. By the end of the week, I was exhausted but determined. I wouldn't allow them to undo my life or my progress. This was my victory, my hard-earned life, and no amount of regret or pleading from them would take it from me. For the first time, I understood that forgiveness, real forgiveness, would not come from pity or compliance. It would come from boundaries, respect, and the slow rebuilding of trust, and trust I knew would take time. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the air in the apartment began to change, not dramatically, but subtly. It was in the quiet moments, my mother humming softly in the kitchen while she washed dishes, my father offering to pick up groceries without being asked. Small gestures, almost invisible, but enough to crack the walls I had built around myself. One evening, I came home exhausted from a long day at work. My parents were in the living room, the TV off, talking quietly over a board game. Grace, the baby of my sister's friend I had been temporarily caring for, was perched on the carpet, giggling as my mother gently guided her little hands over the pieces. I froze in the doorway, heart catching. It was ordinary, mundane, yet it pierced something deep inside me. This was the family I'd longed for at 17, the love, the warmth, the connection I had been denied, and yet it was tainted by all the years they hadn't been there. I stepped into the room quietly, trying not to interrupt. My mother looked up and smiled softly. "Long day?" she asked. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, busy." "You should sit," she said, patting the couch beside her. I hesitated, then sat, watching Grace laugh as she stumbled toward me. My father leaned over to help the child balance, and for the first time I didn't feel the old tension squeezing my chest. We played with Grace together, and for a few precious minutes it felt normal, human. Not perfect, not without the scars of the past, but real. Later, after Grace had gone to bed, my parents and I sat in the living room, silence stretching comfortably between us. My mother finally spoke. "I know I can't change the past," she said quietly, "but I want to be part of your life now. Even a little. If you let me." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "It's complicated," I admitted. "I can't forget what happened, I can't erase those years, but I can let you be here now if you understand that it's on my terms, and you respect that." They nodded, solemn. "We understand," my father said. I realized then that connection didn't mean erasing pain, it meant acknowledging it and choosing, consciously, to engage anyway, to allow them into my life cautiously, keeping my boundaries firm. That night, I went to bed with a strange mixture of emotions, exhaustion, relief, and a flicker of hope. Perhaps we could rebuild something fragile but real. Perhaps even forgiveness could grow slowly, like sunlight seeping through cracks in old walls. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. The fragile connection we'd begun to build didn't last long without challenges. Living under the same roof brought not only old memories but also old habits. One evening, I came home to find my father on the phone, quietly arguing with a collection agency. "What's going on?" I asked, suspicion prickling my skin. He flinched. "It's nothing, just bills, we can handle it." I didn't believe him. 14 years of experience had taught me that nothing often hid something significant. "You can't keep secrets in my house," I said firmly. "If you're going to be here, I need honesty, that's my rule." He looked down, shame and frustration mingling in his eyes. "I didn't want to worry you, I thought I could manage it." I felt the old surge of anger and hurt, that familiar prickling of being dismissed, overlooked, and lied to. "You think I can't handle worry?" I asked, voice shaking. "You think hiding problems from me makes me safer? I've been alone before, I can deal with truth even if it's hard." My mother appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "We're trying," she said softly. "We are trying to do better." I exhaled slowly. I wanted to believe them, I really did, but trust wasn't something you demanded. It was earned, slowly, day by day. I nodded. "Fine, but no more secrets, not in this house." The tension lingered, but something had shifted. They had tried, even if imperfectly. That small act of honesty, though incomplete, was a bridge we could start walking across. Later that night, I caught my father fixing the baby monitor for Grace, quietly humming under his breath. My mother was folding laundry, carefully keeping Grace's clothes organized. I watched from the doorway, realizing that trust could be rebuilt in tiny increments, one gesture, one action at a time. I didn't forgive them fully yet. I didn't even know if I ever could, but I began to understand that forgiveness wasn't a single moment, it was a choice made again and again. And in the quiet of the apartment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the path to healing had begun. Weeks passed and the apartment slowly found a rhythm of coexistence. Not perfect, not easy, but steady. The tension that had gripped every interaction loosened, replaced by small gestures that hinted at something approaching trust. My parents were trying, fumbling, awkward, often clumsy, but trying, and I could see it, that mattered. One evening, I found my mother kneeling on the floor helping Grace practice walking. The baby tottered toward her, hands outstretched, and my mother's face lit with joy. I leaned against the doorway, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in years, I didn't feel a storm of anger or despair when I looked at her. I felt understanding. I stepped into the room. "You're really good at that," I said softly. She looked up, startled, and then smiled. "I've had some practice," she whispered. Later that night, after Grace was asleep, we sat in the living room. My parents and I, together in silence, the kind of silence that isn't suffocating, the kind that's comfortable because it holds space for honesty, for reflection. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice calm but steady, "about everything that's happened, the past 14 years, the abandonment, the anger, the pain." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "I can't forget it. I can't pretend it didn't happen. But I can forgive you a little." My mother's eyes shimmered with tears, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for even saying that." "I'm not inviting the past back into my life," I continued. "I'm not letting the years of hurt disappear. I'm saying I'm willing to see who you are now, cautiously, carefully, and you need to respect that." My father nodded slowly. "We will, we promise." It was a fragile agreement, but it felt real. Unlike before, there was no expectation of instant reconciliation or unearned closeness. There was only honesty, boundaries, and the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding trust. We talked late into the night, sharing small stories, memories of Grace's milestones, little jokes, cautious laughter, and though the shadow of the past never fully disappeared, it felt less threatening. Less like a weight pressing down on my chest, and more like a scar, visible but a reminder that I had survived, that I had grown stronger because of it. When they finally went to bed, I stood in the doorway of the living room, looking at the space that had once been my battlefield. My heart was heavy with the memory of everything lost, but it also carried something new, hope. Hope that even with distance, even with careful boundaries, family could exist, not perfect, not ideal, but real. I closed the door to my bedroom slowly, taking a deep breath. Forgiveness had not erased the past, it had not healed all wounds, but it had given me closure. It had reminded me that strength was not just surviving alone, it was surviving and choosing, consciously, whom to let in and under what terms. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange, delicate peace, the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting or erasing pain, but from standing firmly in your truth and deciding how your story would continue. I would never forget what they had done. I would never fully allow myself to be vulnerable again in the same way. But I had chosen compassion over anger, I had chosen boundaries over resentment, and I had chosen myself always first and foremost. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft breathing of the apartment, Grace's peaceful slumber, my parents' quiet presence, I realized something vital. I had survived the worst of the past, and I could continue to live fully, cautiously, and beautifully in the present, and that in itself was a victory.